So the title of my talk is Appspocalypse or Appsody, right? So those are both puns, but Appsody is in Rhapsody, you know, that kind of happiness. And building a real long-tail economy. So you may think that I'm actually here to talk about apps, but in reality I'm here to talk about pants. So the name of this store is Waffen Will. It's based in Hanover, Germany. Waffen Will specializes in esoteric clothing, not the least of which are these fine olive drab suede leather handmade pants. How many people here think you can buy handmade suede olive drab leather pants in Palo Alto? How about in California? Maybe? San Francisco, but probably not olive drab, because it's kind of a fetish mashup. Right? Because you got the army hunty thing, and you got the leather thing, right? So you can probably get gloss leather pants in San Francisco, but probably not olive drab suede leather pants. And probably not handmade, they probably made in China, unless it was true fetish. In this case, you probably could, which is an interesting and important point. So, why can't you buy these down the street? The reason you can't buy these down the street is because of big box economics. So around late 1800s, centralization of distribution and distribution optimization created sort of an IKEA and Sears Roebuck phenomenon. IKEA in Europe, obviously not at that time frame, but Sears then. I don't know, does anybody know when IKEA started? If you do, if somebody wants to Google that, let me know, that'd be great. But the distribution economy meant that it would be cheaper to centralize, have a single centralized catalog, a single distribution mechanism, a single retail operation, and focus attention on the goods you do have and market away from the goods you don't have. So that process dates back about 100 years. 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 100% of the shopping we did is shopping like this. It was going into a store that sold hats. They didn't sell hammers, they sold hats. And if we were lucky and we lived in a large economy like a big town, there were multiple hat stores. So you went to the hat store that had the hats you liked, sold by people you liked, sold to customers like you. So you went to a hat store, if you were looking for like a work hat, you went to a hat store that specialized in work hats. You did not go to a ladies' hat store. You didn't, because they're not going to have the goods you like, and they're going to be like, you're all scruffy, and you're like clearly a laborer, you're a lady hat store. So big box economics created this phenomenon where the scarcity of physical goods on shelves meant that you could no longer afford to offer handmade olive drab suede leather pants to your customers. Fast forward 100 years from now. 100 years from then, right? So fast forward to today. Today in app stores we have, I'll just use Apple as an example, and in case anyone accuses me of being an Apple hater, I have a Mac, an iPad, and 3 iPhones. And I use an iPhone every day, and I use a Mac every day too, which is funny, based on my previous employer. So what do we have today in the Apple iPhone App Store? We have 300,000 applications, give or take. The statistics that we know are that roughly 50 of those applications are responsible for 50% of the downloads, all up. That's at any given moment. That 50 churns, but it's 50. Of the top 1,000 applications, they are responsible for 90% of the downloads. So if you're the unlucky guy, does anyone use it for you? It doesn't. Okay. If you're the lucky person, and I use guy as a non-gender-based term, by the way. If you're the lucky guy who has an app that's not in the top 1,000, how do you differentiate? How do you find your customers? How do you sell green suede leather pants in an economy in which you have 300,000 completely undifferentiated, specially merchandised, non-marketed, molecular, rules-based distribution? Like, how do you differentiate? What you do is you actually wind up doing what Hootsuite parodied on April 1st, which is you sell happy owls, right? Or slightly agitated badgers, right? You wind up with a lot of stuff that looks the same because you're all chasing the same phenomenon, which is that you're all chasing being part of the hit. Because being a NIST doesn't mean that you have a small market segment or a small number of users. It means you have no users at all. Fast forward to 5 years from now, I believe it was Gartner, but somebody recently published a paper saying there will be 25 million apps in the market by 2015. So if you are the poor bastard who's busy trying to sell a niche-based software business in an app marketplace in which there's zero differentiation, zero specialized merchandising, zero specialized marketing, and no pluggable framework to distribute goods, you are even further lost. The top 1,000 apps are still responsible for 90% because the rules haven't changed. The rules are based on molecular scarcity. You don't have to have molecular scarcity in a digital economy. You ought to be able to, because electrons are free. They aren't really free, and I know talking to this audience, you guys know they're not free, but compared to molecules, they are close enough. You ought to be able to funnel the right audience to this app. Right? We have technology that does stuff like this. We ought to be able to do it. So the question becomes, is this the thing that we, the industry, are building? Or are we building an economy in which we have highly differentiated goods that are discoverable by the people most likely to want them? So simple long-tail economics. Let's say you have a given piece of content, and in the world of 6.2 billion people, there are 1 million people who are willing to experience, who would willingly experience it without sort of reality-bending marketing. And of those 1 million, you got a 10% conversion rate, so 10% of those, 100,000 people spread across 6.2 billion, 100,000 people would be willing to pay for it. 10% conversion rate is reasonable. You could even call that 90% piracy if you wanted to. 10% willing to pay a reasonable price if provided by a reasonable person. It's the hat store phenomenon. You buy from the people you like, right? In that economic model, if you can get 400 million users spread out across that 6.2 billion, you produce 3 goods a year, you charge $2.99 for them, and your conversion rate is 10%. You, as an individual goods provider, at a 70-30 revenue split, can make $65,000 US a year, not counting taxes. So $65,000 doesn't sound like that much money, but if you were a builder of the digital equivalent of green, olive drab, suede, leather pants, that sounds like a fine place to start. To get that, right, what you need is a way to connect to your users in a sticky, persistent, sort of lasting way. You need an economy that helps you shape, not shape it because you're too small to shape, helps you find the people who want what you're making, which is the equivalent of olive drab suede leather pants. So rather than when you wake up in the morning thinking, I need to make something just like Angry Birds, which by the way is, I think, now to 60 million units, 70 million units shipped, right? Their conversion rate of free to pay is 30%. They're making well over $1 million in advertising monthly. Total, everybody wants to be like Angry Birds, but let's face it, there's a limited number of Angry Birds, especially in this kind of economy, because really they're at the very, very top of that little thing, right? So let's say you want to deliver a lacrosse app for lacrosse players. Probably are 100,000 people in the world who would be willing to pay a reasonable fee for a great lacrosse app, right? How do you get to them? How do you find those people in this kind of economy? We think the way you do this is by building an ecosystem that caters specifically to the needs of 3 important segments. Give creators a solution that lets them either work through curators, through the act of curation, to help them find those users, or lets them build relationships, services-based relationships directly with their users, build something for consumers that at the very least is not in the way. So means that the role of curation actually has a role. So if you are building a store, you could say, I want to specialize and be the hipster store. I want to be the working mom store. I want to be the kids store. It lets you do things like choose a pattern language that's different in design for China than it is for France, because you don't say that you have to have a global pattern language because you're not trying to drive this style of economy, right? You're not trying to say we're going to be a one-size-fits-all solution that has a high churn rate and does hit chasing at the top. For the curation role, I like to call this curation because I think that's like a key overlooked role. Right? This is the give people the tools to merchandise in the market so that they can they can provide the goods that they think their users want, rather than the goods that somebody else says the highest percentage of users spread out across the world maybe or do or don't want. Okay, is this my warning light?
What's on?
Okay, I like it, that's nice. Is it like, do I get like electrocuted or shocked?
When it goes red.
Sweet. So we don't want, this, right? I think this is bad. I think this is using steam locomotive-based economics in the digital age. It's based on not even just artificial scarcity. It's like we're inheriting a bunch of rules and a bunch of assumptions about how business is supposed to work, based on rules that were written, before we were all born. South by Southwest, 2 years ago, look out the window, it's sometime between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning. Most people at 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning at South by. Best line I've heard about South by is, it's Burning Man that your company will pay for. Which if you've been, it kind of is. This line spontaneously forms. Not this actual line, because this is a line Robert Scoble took a picture of, but I watched this happen outside my hotel room. Line spontaneously forms in front of literally a dumpster in the middle of the street. Flaring sun, most people completely hungover, totally bleary-eyed, waiting patiently for this chipper young woman who's standing in her awning, drinking ice water and holding a clipboard. What are they waiting for? They are waiting for concert tickets. Why? Because they're fans. And because what has happened is the art of curation and the role of curation has meant that at that exact moment, in that exact time, the best place to be, even if you're still drunk from the night before, is in line because you're a fan. The role of musicians in the modern economy and the role of app developers is essentially now indistinguishable and identical. That's important to think about because we all know musicians who do not make a living playing music, but they do it like 20 hours a week. They go to open mic night, now it's blinking red, I'm going to get hit by the death ray. We all know people like that. App developers are now actually very similar. In fact, they are economically indistinguishable. They're not just in it for the money, they're also in it for recognition, the art form, the craft, being a little tribe, being recognition, being leaders, whatever, but they do it. And another part of the effect of the digital economy we want is we want to be able to ensure that they can get that too. So it's not just about money, it's also about a whole set of ancillary benefits that they need to be able to attach themselves to. And if their goods can't be found to be used at all, they get nothing. So I'll end with one of my favorite pictures. This guy spent 5 hours playing a game on his iPhone tethered to his PC. Why? Yes. Power. This is the world's most expensive iPhone battery. Why did he have the mouse out?
Habit.
Come on, you got to get this. You got the first one. Why did you?
Stop hibernating.
Exactly, because if it hibernates, then it doesn't work as a battery anymore. So he bumped the battery with his elbow to keep the thing awake. You can see the screensaver on it. It's not a good resolution. Keep the thing awake in order to keep it working. I use this as a reminder of actually when we think about, wow, it's awesome, new digital age, blah, 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 blah. People are willing to go through this kind of bullshit in order to have a decent experience on a device. So there's tons of opportunity here for value add, and we also shouldn't assume that just because somebody appears to be a clear leader that, well, in the case of Windows, which at one point was a clear leader, and it still is in some segments, and the iPhone, which is a clear leader in some segments, that in fact, there's not opportunity here for people to get it right. So I think, I'm done.